Celebrating the 4th of July, Truefire are running a Stars, Stripes and Strings sale, providing 60% off of their all-access pass. If you're interested in that you can dip in and out of every single thing on Truefire. Really great value for money. Also, they got 50% off of some individual courses, so check out the link in the description if you're interested in that. So, I just met Andy, and he was borrowing my Van Wilden Royal Overdrive, and I was borrowing his Kingsley Harlot. And he said I'd be interested to know where you think this thing stacks up on the sort of artist to Nacho continuum. Now, I'm sure almost anybody watching this video will, of course, have heard of Tokai. And I'm sure you probably will be fairly well aware of what these guitars started out all about. Now, the idea was that the Japanese were actually basically recreating some of the classic guitars from about 20 years prior, you know, maybe 20 to 30 years prior, and doing their sort of take on them, and essentially almost inventing the idea of cloning. They had done this with cars, like some of the great American cars, and they were now doing this with guitars. Tokai were there in this, Greco, Fugijen, these kind of companies. Ibanez as well started off in this way. But at the time, you also couldn't really get these guitars made in America. Things had kind of fallen off in a lot of ways, and it was in fact these guitars, you know, Fugijen, Tokai, Greco, that actually made Fender realise that we need to change what we're doing. This neck feels fantastic in my hand as I'm holding it. This is what Tokai called the Breezysound. The one negative that you might have, this is a really interesting serial, 222212. I might have said too many times, but the whole principle is it's basically as close to that vintage thing as you could get. Obviously, this is not that close. I think Andy's put in a set of creamery pickups, and the only other downside really versus a vintage guitar, I mean, it is vintage, isn't it? But the only downside versus, you know, like a real 50s or 60s would be that this is poly, so you don't get quite as much wear. Although this does feel quite lightweight, I'll get it on the scales. The neck feels incredibly comfortable. So I would say I've just tuned up. The neck is wonderful and comfortable. You can see, like if you see it up close and personal, that it's like it's like the thin, what's the word for it? Like the rosewood laminate type thing, instead of it being slab. It's quite a light coloured rosewood. So I presume not Brazilian. Plus 12 dB boost here. Forgot how to play. We're fretting out here, so this is like one of the trade-offs with that vintage radius. So you'll get only really like... You can't do like a Dave Gilmour bend on it, otherwise it will just do that. But I think you're getting like... does feel like an old guitar, and I think one of the key things going on there, I think some people might not necessarily love that. I think that there are definitely people out there who subscribe to the idea that like a modern instrument is going to be just in general better, but it's just like a bit of a softer feel to the edges and bits and pieces like that. Like if it was Nitro, I'd be even more in on this, but the way that it kind of works is that because it's poly, I don't think it wears off the edges quite as much. It's kind of just the sense that I get with it. I've got a parcel force about to arrive. In terms of like what Andy's question was, how would I rate this sort of on the scale of artist to Nacho? I would say that honestly this feels to me like it's up there with like any of the Fender sort of AVRI sort of stuff. I've played a few of those. Some of those have quite like a sticky Nitro feel. This doesn't. The frets are quite low, so in terms of playability, I think you're probably erring more towards the side of like a vintage guitar in that front anyway. And that's one of the only downsides really that I can see with having a guitar like this, because you get an awful lot of guitar for your money, and wood that it has been, I presume, had less issues with the sort of pollution and that sort of stuff. I think it looks like a fairly slim finish anyway. This isn't like a really chunky poly finish. So you're getting quite a lot of guitar for your money with these sorts of things, right? If you can find one. So I would say, Andy, the artist guitars are really good guitars for the money, but a used Tokai, if you're into these kind of vintage guitar specs, like you really do have this kind of Goldilocks neck spec. I had a vintage Hot Rod 60s Tele, so that would have been like sort of like an AVRI equivalent. I've had an AVRI 52 Tele. This feels, I think, pretty incredible to play. The only downsides for me, such that they are that poly body and maybe the slightly lower frets, and the other thing going on with this particular guitar is that as I bend up, it's going to choke out because of that really vintage radius. But actually, that is a fantastic feeling guitar. A lovely piece of wood used for the Maple 2. A serious guitar if you're like actually into this kind of thing. You can't do better than that for the money. I'm fairly confident of saying that. Like a modern guitar is not gonna get that same sort of vibe, in my opinion. That's pretty fantastic. Like, it feels pretty up there with my K-lines, to be honest with you.